All right. So, am I all good, Barb? Okay. So I called this 10 years to $10,000 an hour, in part because it's intriguing, in part because that's the story. And like I said, I hope you have a lot of good takeaways today. All right, so first we'll get into the disclaimers here. I'm a licensed real estate agent. I purchased investment property before I was a licensed agent and after I was a licensed agent, and I'm going to talk about those experiences. But there are some things that I'm not. I'm not an attorney, so if we start talking about things that are bordering on legal, you know that I can't give legal advice. Also, we'll talk about some accounting type things. Just know that this is just, I'm not going to get into it too in depth, but you know, if you need a guidance from a CPA, seek out somebody with those credentials. And I'm not a financial advisor, so if you want to grow your portfolio in other ways, you know, please seek a professional in that area. Okay. So other disclaimers. So I used to be a physical education teacher. So usually I'm only talking in front of people for 2 to 5 minutes, and then we are doing a lot of interaction. So just know that at any point, if you have any questions, just stop me. I can also talk endlessly about real estate. So these slides help me keep on track. So feel free to ask questions and I'll get back on track with the slides. So, okay. Also, real estate investing is a get rich slow game. Okay, that's, I didn't say you know, 6 months to $10,000 a year. It was 10 years to $10,000 a year. So it was a progression and some progress, and it doesn't happen just overnight. The benefits are not usually immediate. They take time to develop, and it is a snowball effect. So for example, the way I've often looked at it is when you purchase your first investment property, it's like, you know, packing up that snowball and you're like rolling it, and you're really working to get it bigger and bigger, and then eventually get it to the side of the hill. And now it's starting to gradually roll down on its own. It's gradually getting bigger on its own. And then you start that next snowball and you get that one going. And you're working on that one while this one's kind of just doing its own thing. And then eventually, if you get to the point where you have multiple snowballs going down the side of the hill and you're not doing anything, that's when, you know, you really hit that spot that you want to be in. So, you know, just know that that snowball effect is there. But it takes work to get there. Oh. All right, so why am I doing this? So real estate investing basically changed my life. I kind of stumbled into it and, you know, didn't do the due diligence that you're doing right now by really getting educated on this subject. I just figured, okay, well, if this property can earn me money by just simply holding on to it, that seems like a good idea. And then over time, I've just gained some other knowledge along the way. So my hope is that by learning from me here, that I can either help you get started, or if you've already started, that I can help you accelerate your progress. And then I also know that by supporting you, that I'm helping you towards the causes that are important to you. And generally speaking, from most real estate investors that I've had conversations with, they want to give back. They want to give back. So by helping you, I'm helping you towards the causes that are important to our community that, you know, perhaps I don't have the ability to do by myself. So primary goals, you want to figure out your big why, because there's a reason why, even though this is a really good concept, that a lot of people don't do this. So if there's times where it's going to seem daunting, even in this presentation, you're going to look at some of this information and perhaps think, boy, this seems complicated, even though I'm trying to simplify it. That's the reason why I think so few people in our country actually get involved in investment real estate. The reality is, if you have a bigger purpose for why you're doing it, you're so much more likely to keep pursuing it even when things get a little bit challenging. The other thing is to determine your freedom number. So what I mean by that is figuring out the amount of money you need to earn passively so that you can choose whether or not you work, or you can choose what work looks like. Okay, so that might be, so for example, I still enjoy teaching. So I still twice a year go to the high school where I coach and that I used to teach, and give a similar presentation to this to high school students. But I get to do it on my time twice a year. I don't have to grade anything. So, just kind of think along those lines. What would be your freedom number? What would that look like? Okay, so then my journey in terms of the properties looks like this. In 2011, I bought 911 Delaplane. That was a single family house. It's over in the Vilas neighborhood. It still exists, but not at that address. There was a developer that owned most of the properties in that area and eventually bought me out along with the rest of us. So now there's an apartment complex there. That house was moved around the corner and still exists, but it's now on a different street. So when I sold that, I did what's called a 1031 exchange. I'll hit on that lightly, but essentially sold that one, and with the proceeds purchased 2 multi-units on Mifflin Street that are a block apart from each other. I did that in 2014. And then 2 years later, so because I had been saving up for what would have been the second purchase, and I ended up purchasing East Main in 2016. And that was the point in which I got my real estate license. So after that one, the lender that I'd been working with said, oh, hey, we can do these loans at 15% down. And I was like, oh, well, now that means I can purchase a property a year. And if I'm going to do that, I might as well make a commission. So I got my license at that time, purchased 325 West Wilson, which is my first 3-unit. That was 2017. Then you'll see that there's a big gap because I got very busy being a real estate agent, and I was trying to do too many things. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But eventually, I got back and to purchasing some property. I bought my first 8-unit at the start of 2020, right before the pandemic. I brought that 2-unit kind of in the middle of the pandemic. That was the summer. And then earlier this year, I bought an 8-unit on Valley Street that's in Cross Plains. So that's my first property outside of Madison. Okay. All right, so discussion topics for today. We're going to talk about different types of investors, being a homeowner versus being a real estate investor, because there's some parallels and that you can kind of go back and forth between. Cash versus cash flow, knowing your dollar per hour, the ability of real estate investing, and just leveling up your investment. We'll kind of talk about that. Before we go any further, though, just out of curiosity, out of the people that are here, raise your hand if you already invest in investment real estate. You already have 1 or more properties. Okay, sweet. All right. Raise your hand if you're kind of getting started. You're kind of seeing if investment real estate will be a fit for you. Raise your hand if you're just kind of checking it out. Okay, that's most people. Now we got a lot of agents here. Raise your hand if you are a real estate agent or licensed agent in the state of Wisconsin, or yeah, I think it was about half, if I remember, sign up. So that's awesome. So anyways, we'll just keep on going. Just wanted to kind of see where the crowd is at. Oh. All right, so first we're going to do that comparison between being a homeowner and a real estate investor. So as a real estate agent, I'm a huge advocate for home ownership. I wouldn't do this if I thought home ownership was a bad idea. And 2 of the really awesome benefits of being a homeowner is the fact that, when you're renting and you pay a landlord, 100% of that money is going to that other person. Where when you are a homeowner, some of that money is going to the bank and you never see that again. That's your interest payment. but some of it's going toward the principal, and you're paying down your mortgage. So that essentially acts like for savings. So it's like you're putting money in the bank. All right. And then additionally, equity is improved over time and with updates and improvements. So if if you do a kitchen remodel, you do a bathroom remodel or something like that, you are helping to make the property more valuable. And then of course, when you have a year like we just did, where property values are going up, 18% in 1 year, that's not a typical year, but for a lot of people, you see that, most years you're still seeing a gain with your home. So a real estate investor, you're taking all that and you're basically putting it on steroids. So because the tenants are paying, well, at least when you're buying a property, you should purchase a property where where there is positive cash flow. So the tenants are paying more in rent than all of your expenses combined. And because they're paying for all of that, they're essentially paying for the mortgage as well. So it's like the tenants are putting money in your bank instead of you putting money in your bank. Okay. Additionally, you get the equity improvement over time and with updates, just like you did as a homeowner, but now you're also seeing that with rent improvements. And I'll show you that a little bit later, how you can really exponentially grow that way. And then cash flow, of course, is achieved when the rent is higher than the mortgage, taxes, and other expenses, which you can't do in most homeowner situations. All right, so then it's a matter of, do you buy for cash or do you buy for cash flow and equity? I do the latter. I buy for long-term buy and hold or buy, improve, and hold. However, and this is about all I'll talk about with short-term investing, it is definitely an option in terms of growing your real estate portfolio. So, short-term investor, that's essentially your home flipper. They buy, they improve it, and they sell it. Okay, so why it's a good idea is, it's a good way to build up a cash reserve. You do need to be knowledgeable, resourceful, handy, or some combination of those things. Otherwise, it might not go as well. It might not be so profitable. The problem with flipping is once you stop doing it, the money stops coming in. So it's essentially a job. It can be a very good paying job. I know someone here in the office who did a flip a couple of years ago, maybe it was last year, and it ended up being like $100,000 flip. Now it took, a good chunk of time to do, but it ended up being a good money earner for that one. But the next one maybe doesn't go quite as well. So, but regardless, even if you're doing 100K a flip and you're doing that every year, that's a great income. But as soon as you stop, the money stops coming in. So long-term investment is typically not as lucrative. You're usually not going to make, like I said, off of one property, 100K a year. However, you're earning cash flow and you're receiving other slow benefits that eventually add up over time. And as long as you own, the money keeps coming in. And so that's passive. So like if today I just stop buying properties with what I've got already in place, the money just keeps coming in. I don't have to keep doing anything. Okay. So now going to know your dollar per hour. When I was a teacher, when I first started, I made less than 50K a year. By the time I finished, I made more than that, but I would say the average salary in my latter years was around 50K. So let's just assume teachers only work 182 days, which is per contract, which they definitely work more than that, and stay within that 7.5 hour time frame, which they definitely do. Like they definitely exceed that. But if they were able to maintain in that, it's a $36 an hour gig for that. And then, so let's go ahead to someone that we would say is a high income earner. I think most people would say if you're making $200,000 a year, you're a high income earner. So we'll break that down 48 weeks. So let's assume they take 4 vacation weeks a year. And let's just assume that they can manage to do that in a 40-hour work week, which they probably don't, because of the people I know that make 6 figures, they generally work well over 40 hours a week. But if they did, their dollar per hour is $104 an hour. Okay. So when I purchased my first rental property, I was making $7,000 a year. It was about 40 hours a year, most of which was the week of move out, move in. So probably 20 hours was that week, and then 20 hours collectively for the other time of the year. So I'm already at $175 an hour. So if you go back, my dollar per hour is already better than the person making $200,000 a year. The problem is you can't live off of, well, at least I couldn't live off of $7,000 a year. That wasn't enough. So after I got that rental property, it did not take long before I realized I just need to get more of these properties. So the next step was getting more properties. So when I went to 2 rental properties, I went from 1 building to 2 buildings, but I went from 2 units to 4 units because each one of those buildings had 2 units in it. So now I'm up to $20,000 a year, but my time went up. Okay, so I went up to 80 hours a year, which still wasn't too bad. And now I'm up to $250 an hour. Now skip to when I had 4 properties. Now I've got 9 units. I'm making $40,000 a year, up to but my time goes up. My dollar per hour, and you start to see it's starting to plateau. You know, it's starting to kind of, I'm starting to kind of get stuck. And then the next situation that I got up there was actually a hypothetical, because I got stuck at that 4 rental properties for a long time. I was, as you saw in that other slide, I was basically in that spot for 3 years because I was, you know, at that point, that's when I had just made the transition to being a real estate agent, but I was busy helping people buy and sell houses. I was still managing the property. If there was somebody not coming back, I was the one showing it. If there was a problem, I was the one getting the call. So I just didn't have time. And every time there was a good opportunity, I was just like, I just don't have the time. So I wouldn't make the purchase because I didn't think I could take it on. So start of 2020, I hired a property manager, and then for the real estate investments, and then on the business side, I hired a transaction coordinator who basically does like the paperwork and those types of things. And the combination of doing those 2 things freed up so much time that the next time a good opportunity came up, which happened to be that 8 unit, I was just like, oh, I'll just buy it. And then there was a ton of stuff that needed to happen to it. But I was like, I won't even have to do any of the work. My property manager seemed eager to do most of the jobs himself, and the things that he couldn't do efficiently, he had subcontractors all lined up. So I'm just going to show you, hypothetically, had I not hired a property manager, quit my job, managed those 5 properties, it would have been $80K a year, probably 250 hours a year, which breaks down to 21 hours a month. So now I've got a part-time job, but I'm getting paid pretty well for that. $320 an hour is good money. However, what I actually did is by hiring the property manager, you'll see that I went from 80K a year to 60K a year, because now the property manager is taking their cut of the rents. But now I just went from 250 hours a year down to only 10 hours a year. So now I'm up to $6,000 an hour. And I just broke down, because people are like, well, 10 hours a year, how's that work out? So basically, as I'm showing here, a 15-minute phone call every month, just kind of checking in, like, you know, I get my statement and I can see, oh, hey, there's like a $350 plumbing charge. I can ask about that. Hey, what happened? Is there anything else I should know about? You know, do we need to, anything else we need to do with the property? No? Okay, good. Call you in another month. All right. Also, I don't think it should be so passive that you never go to the property. So twice a year, I do a 30-minute walkthrough of each property. I don't actually go through the units, but I go through every part of the building that I can without getting having to give notice to tenants. So if there's common basement space, common hallways, and then of course the exterior of the building, that's what I'm checking out when I'm there. And then I just got 2 hours for just the random phone calls, unexpected occurrences, things come up. It's real estate for a reason. It's real property, things happen. So you just have to be ready for that. And then the next step in the progression, as I was putting this together before I got any more units, was, well, if I had 40 financed units, or if you had about 20 units non-financed, you're probably at about 120K an hour. And now you have more time, a little bit more time, because now you have more properties to walk through. And that's therefore how you get the 10,000 an hour. 120K a year, 12 hours a year, 10,000. And I'm somewhere in the middle of that. I've got 27 units, 8 of which are not financed. They don't have a loan, and the rest all have loans on them. Okay. So these are the things that make real estate a really awesome investment, because obviously you could invest your money in a lot of different things. But these, I don't think that there's anything out there. I don't think there's any stock where you could say it does all of these different things. So accessible, if you can get a loan, you can buy it. Okay. And even if you cannot get a loan, you might be able to work out some kind of seller financing with the owner in certain situations, and you might be able to purchase it even if you can't qualify for a loan. Oops. So then you got appreciable. So it increases over time, as we kind of already talked about a little bit. We'll go into that a little bit more. Leverageable. This is really powerful because you can buy on a fraction and you own the whole thing. You get the benefit of the whole thing, even though you just purchased a fraction of it. Rentable, that's where you get your cash flow. It's improvable. So as you, whether sweat equity, or even sometimes it's you change something about the zoning, you can improve the property for its best use and have it make more money. And then we got the deferrable, the depreciable, or the deductible, the depreciable, and deferrable. That's the triple Ds. So that's those are the tax benefits. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we've got, just generally stable, like the stock market could take a huge hit this month, and then it'll come right back up next month, and then it could take a huge hit the next month. Where in real estate, prices generally are slow to rise, and when they go down, they're slow to go down. It's not like it's crashing out. And then of course it's livable. If something really bad happened, I could move into one of my apartment buildings if needed. So it just gives you some different options. So we're going to talk about how improving your property looks as a homeowner versus a real estate investor. So as a homeowner, let's say I did a 25K kitchen update, right? And that could, and depending on your neighborhood and depending on a lot of other factors, maybe that 25K update improves your property value by 15K, because it's not supported. Or maybe it improves it by 30K and you get a little bit of bonus out of it, or somewhere in between. I generally tell, I have clients that reach out sometimes and they're saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this improvement. Does that make sense? I start looking at comparable sales in their neighborhood and like, oh yeah, a lot of other people have that and it looks like it really helps their sale. Or boy, nobody's really doing that in your neighborhood, and you're essentially making yourself the most expensive house on the block. So if you're going to do it for yourself, but not necessarily for the equity improvement. Where a real estate investor, you could do a far smaller update. And I'm using this as an example. This would be when I bought that first 8 unit. This would be property number 5. I upgraded each unit by $10,000. So that was basically replacing the flooring, replacing the kitchen countertops, new appliances, repainting it. And by doing all that, I was able to increase the rent by about $200 a month, okay, or $2,400 a year for just that one unit. So if you go based off a GRM is gross rent multiplier, with a gross rent multiplier in an area of 10, I've now improved the property by 24K just by that $10,000 update. And so just so you know how to calculate gross rent multiplier and what it is, it's a simple formula that some investors use, not all investors, but some investors use it to determine value for a property. It's basically you take the property value or the sale price or and you divide that by the annual rent. That gives you the gross rent multiplier. So let's see here. Okay, so then let's get into the improvable. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. So rental property number 2, this is on a small scale example. I bought it at $300,000. It was getting $33,000 a year in rent. And so it was basically a gross rent multiplier of 9.1. So over the next 2 years, I spent $18K on the property. And by doing so, I was able to raise the rents to just over $3,000 a month. So that gave me a gross rent multiplier, excuse me. So that now I'm up to $36,000 a year. And if you take the, hey, I was a gross rent multiplier of 9.1, you put it in there. Now I'm up to 330K. So did 18K of improvements. I've improved the property 30K. The reality, though, is that that property was in an area where it was a gross rent multiplier of a 10 at the time. So the reason why I got it at a discount was because there was a lot of deferred maintenance. The tenants upstairs had lived there for 14 years and their rent hadn't been increased in a super long time. Additionally, they smoked in the unit. So it was just like, oh, I'm inheriting a problem. And then so over the next 2 years, by solving that problem, now I've got something that's on par with the other multifamilies in the neighborhood. And so in actuality, I probably improved that property by over $60,000. Okay, so yeah, that's the summary. 18K spent, over 60K improvement value. So now we'll go with a large scale example. So now you look at that rental property number 5, where I purchased it at $820K. It was getting in a combined income of $93,000 and change a year. So it was a gross rent multiplier of 8.8. Okay. Now I spent $70K over 2 years, put a lot of money into that property, but by doing so, I raised the rents to $120K a year. So if you take that $120K, multiply it by the gross rent multiplier, and now I have a property that's over $1 million. But just like the example before, there was a lot of problems with that property. That it was built in the mid-90s. The owner hadn't done anything to it. So it was just kind of gradually getting run down more and more. One of the units, again, had a smoker, and the guy had like 3 pit bulls that was kind of tearing up the place. So we increased rents, we made all those improvements. We got, if you put in the, so I got, it was a 9.5 gross rent multiplier area. So you take the rent times that, and now we're up to about a 1.15 million property. So again, the summary, 70K spent, improved the property by over $300,000. All right, any questions on any of this? Because I know that's kind of the, there's a little bit more math kind of stuff, but I try to keep it simple. But
yeah. Do you want us to ask questions at the end, or I mean, I guess because I wrote a question down about this. But.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm assuming that you're using this gross rent multiplier to help you decide what properties to purchase.
I used to lean on it really heavy early on, and now I lean on it a lot less because it really is like a really simple formula. So it's just like, I still coach high school track and field, and the more simple a test that I do, of a physical test that I do, so let's say I just do a standing long jump, right? I can do that standing long jump, but it's a very simple test, and I can see, who can do this well, who can do this, not as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean the person that went the longest is going to be my best long jumper. So it's just one of those simple things. Because when you're
something that would make or break it though, like if it was this low, you feel like, is there a range that you try to stay in, I guess?
And it also depends on the area, I mean, I think that's just where it helps to, really know your stuff, or be working with somebody that knows their stuff. Because then they just know, okay, this is, generally speaking, this is an area that typically, trades around this. And that's a really simple formula because that doesn't take into account expenses. Once you take account expenses, that's where you get a cap rate, which is a little bit more, I didn't want to get into that because that's a little bit more complex of a, it's still relatively similar, but now you're doing some additional tweaks to it. But yeah, there's no, there's no golden rule when it comes to this, but I still look, if a gross rent multiplier is like way off, like let's say it's an area, I mean, obviously properties have improved. So that area that was a 10 way back is now more like a 12. If something hits the market and they're listing it at a 14, and I think the rents are, maybe could be improved a little bit, but not substantially. I'm just, that's it. I'm not spending more than 30 seconds looking at that property. Like, I just know that that's just not going to work. So, yeah.
So I do understand that in addition to this, there's a spreadsheet that kind of more answers that question that you have that people more definitive yes or no, and for this it comes down to basically plugging in the right numbers in the right space. The question that I have is, how is it that you determine not so much what the budget is using 30,000 for example, but how is it that you determine how you spend that 30,000 as it relates to you actually being able to improve the value of the property? Because I understand that just because you put 30,000 in doesn't guarantee that it's going to be. I know it has a certain strategy. So you got to share that strategy.
So, yeah. So basically just, I've got a few out-of-state investors and out-of-area investors that are tuning in via Zoom here. So trying to get those guys plugged in too. But so yeah, basically the question is, if you, how do you know that you put that 30K in and that you're going to get that money back? The reality is, yeah. So now these days I lean heavily on my property manager. I just say, hey, how much would it cost to do this improvement? And if we do that, how much can we expect the rent to go up? So I have a little bit more specific, but I'll be honest, back in the day, I just would do it. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, when you do this real estate investing thing, there's no like exact science to it. Even when you purchase the property, you make that down payment, and on paper, you can see where it is for the current, it's like the rents are currently this, my expenses will be, my mortgage based on the purchase price, my mortgage is going to be this, I'm going to have this much of a down payment, but that's a snapshot. And, depending on what other things happen down the pike is going to affect everything. So you just can't assume, I would buy properties and be like, okay, this is just the way it's going to be. And then, I mean, going back to rental property number 2, that's over on East Mifflin. That was before they built Festival Foods. That was before they put all the stuff that they're putting on East Wash right now. So I didn't know they were going to do that when I bought it. And that's been pro and con, because pro, they're doing a lot of stuff that makes that area more desirable. Con, there's literally hundreds of apartment units that they are putting within walking distance of my place, every year. So the reality is you just don't know for sure. All you can do is, look at it at the time and just say, hey, does this make sense? But nowadays I do have a property manager that I lean on, and then just decide, hey, if I do this, how much do you think I can increase the rent? And, but he could be wrong, so that's the thing, you just don't know. Fortunately, every time he's been wrong, so far it's been in the correct direction. So like, he's like, even on the second example here, he was wrong in the way that he thought I could raise the rents 150. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, we're actually raising it, 200 or 250. So, so he kind of over delivered there on that one. So I don't know. Does that help a little bit? Okay. So now we're going to talk about the power of appreciation. So I'm going back to rental property 2 and 3, because it's the 2 East Mifflin properties. So when I purchased those, they were 300,000 each with a 20% down payment. So I had about 240K of debt on each of those. Fast forward 6 years, and now those properties appraise at 400,000. Okay, now also consider the fact that the tenants have paid down the debt to 190K. So 50K per property. So when I decided to do a cash out refinance, they only require that I keep 20% in the property, or at least that lender did for me. So we've got 320K that I can pull out. That would be my 80% that I can pull out, minus the 190K of debt that I still have. So I was able to cash out, refinance 130K out of each property. So now I have 260K. So just simply owning those properties, and it's like, forget about the fact that I made, you know, $20,000 a year off those properties. I now, just by simply owning them, cash out. Right now, my cash flow went down though, because I have more debts. My mortgage payment went up. Okay, but you know, so what? Like I went from making $20,000 a year off those properties down to like $14,000 a year off that. And by going down, I was able to have 260K at my disposal that I can now make a cash purchase on a, you know, like small duplex. Or if I did a loan, I could put a loan on, I could put a 20% down payment on a $1.3 million apartment complex. Okay, that's going to far exceed the amount that the amount of money that I am losing in cash flow due to the cash out refinance. Okay, the other awesome part about it is when I do that cash out refinance, that's a non-taxed event. That's seen as my equity. So that's simply like, you know, moving money from your checking account to your savings account. So that's pretty awesome too. Okay, so then leverageable. This one I like to go back to that first property because I actually sold it. Yeah.
Just a quick question on that. What you have to, that assumes you would reinvest the money?
Yeah, so that assumes you reinvest the money. So you wouldn't just do it for the sake of doing it unless you needed, you know, 260,000 for something else.
But you have to buy property with that, or it is taxable. No?
Once again, I'm not a CPA, but I do not believe when you do a cash out refinance, I do not believe that's a taxable event.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely consult your CPA before doing something like that. But I don't believe that that's a taxable event. Okay, so on the leverageable piece, so going back to that first property, okay, I bought that single family house at 210,000. I sold it at 290,000. So I got an 80K profit. So if I would have bought that cash, I'm getting almost a 40% return on investment, which looks pretty good, you know, considering, you know, everything else. But the reality is I only had a $42,000 down payment. So if you look at, okay, $42,000 was my investment, and I made a profit of 80,000, I'm actually approaching close to a 200% return on investment. Then add in the fact that I cash flowed 28K during the 3 years I owned it, and that the tenants paid down $8,000 my principal, the actual 3-year return on investment is getting close to 300%. So, you know, so that's the power of leverage, is I got the whole benefit of owning that house, even though I really only paid for 20% of it. And that's the thing that you can do on investment property that, you know, you can't do in the stock market. Stock market, it's just, you know, whatever the stock is, you buy it. You can't buy 20% of the stock and get the benefit of the whole thing. And you can with investment real estate. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, so then I'm going to use that first example again because it's a really simple one. When you look at the cash flow from that rental property, that first rental property I bought, I was making $2,000 a month or $24K a year. My monthly mortgage payment was $850, or, you know, just over $10,000. I also had insurance of $800 a year, property taxes of $5,500 a year, and then just $500 a year in additional expenses. I managed it myself, so there's no property management fee. So I was cash flowing $7,000. Okay. So that's how the cash flow works. Now, we're going to talk about this aspect a little bit later, but you can also use the rentable piece to reduce your living expenses. So if you look down here, you'll see that I reverse engineered it. So now I'm looking at what are my monthly expenses. It was about $1,400 a month. So if I rent one room, I'm still getting all the benefits of the home ownership, but my share is only $900 now. And if I rent 2 rooms, my share is only $400. And if I end up renting all 3 rooms, I'm now making $100 a month to live there. So, so it is possible, although not often. Like I said, you know, the home prices at that time were a lot lower. However, you can substantially reduce your expenses by renting out other rooms, and that's just called house hacking. Okay, so now we're going to get into the triple D benefits here. So that's your deductible, your depreciable, and your deferrable. So deductible, if I own a home that I live in, and I need a new furnace, I need a new roof, I need a new water heater, any of those types of things, I just have to pay for it, and that's it. That's just one of those things you just need to do to maintain your property. However, if that's a rental property and those things go, you get to use that as a tax deduction. That's considered a business expense. So when those things come up, you're actually able to write off those things. Then we've got the depreciable. This was the thing I had no idea existed until I was preparing for my first tax return after owning property. My sister was a CPA, and she was just like, "Oh, make sure you put something for the depreciation." I'm like, "Well, what's that?" So she's like, "Well, basically, you're going to take the property, the purchase price of the property. You're going to deduct the land value, because the land, the way the government looks at it is the land will always be there, and that always has some worth. But the structure itself, they're going to allow you to depreciate that. And however, I don't know how they came up with this number, but you basically get to depreciate it for 27.5 years. And in this circumstance, that breaks down to just over $5,800 a year as a tax break. So I asked her, I said, "Well, can you explain it to me?" And her explanation is really good, so I'll just give the exact same explanation she gave me. She said, "Let's say you were a carpenter and you needed like a table saw to do the job that you're going to do. And let's say the table saw costs $8,000. The government knows that you're going to have that table saw for a handful of years, and they're not going to give you that $8,000 tax break in just 1 year. They want you to spread it out. So they're just going to say, okay, that table saw, I'm just throwing out random numbers, but like, you know, is going to be 8 years that we'll let you depreciate that. So as that carpenter, that business owner, they get to deduct that saw $1,000 every year for the next 8 years. And then once they get to year 9, year 10, year you know, and beyond, they can keep using it. They just don't get to use it as a tax break anymore, because now they've fully used that up. Same thing with a house. You know, I get to deduct that for 27.5 years. At that point, that benefit goes away. And if I want to continue that benefit, I'd have to sell that property and purchase another property in its replacement. But the awesome thing is when the next person buys it from me, even if I used up all 27.5 years, guess what? They get to depreciate it for 27.5 years. So each person that owns it gets to use that depreciation, which is pretty awesome. And then of course there's the deferrable, which, you know, going back to example number 1 again, I sold that property with an $80,000 profit plus 3 years of depreciation. So I'm pushing $100K of improvement in terms of how the government looks at that. But instead of paying capital gains, because I purchased other properties and rolled the proceeds into other properties, I basically just kicked the can down the road. I don't have to pay until a later date. And of course, if I own them all the way until I pass away, the person that inherits them starts all over again at the beginning, so which is pretty awesome. At least that's how it works now. we'll see how it goes. So now I do a kind of a breakdown of what that cash flow, kind of looking at that last slide or 2 slides ago in comparison to, you know, how it works on accounting side. Now I might be oversimplifying. So again, you know, if you want to talk, if you really want to dig deep in this, talk to your accountant, not me. But on this side, this is everything I just talked about. There's the money coming in, there's all the money going out, and there's my cash flow. But on the eyes of the government, they definitely pay attention to the money coming in. They don't care so much about what my mortgage payment is, but they will give me a credit for the interest because they're seeing that as money that's going away. I still get to take that insurance and property tax and the expenses as deductions, but now I also get to reduce by that depreciation amount. And now, even though I made 7,000, I actually, according to IRS, I actually made just under 4,000. Okay, so when I did this presentation for high school students at one point, I had a teacher that happened to be sitting down at this point, and he asked me at the end, he's like, I just don't see the big deal. You made 7,000, you got taxes if you made, you know, like 4,000. I just don't see how that's that big of a benefit. And I said, okay, well, I didn't say it at the time because I was like, well, it is, but you know, I just didn't. But so I went home that night and I thought about it a little bit more. I'm like, okay, well, what if you scale it? If you 10x that, and you're making 70K a year, and you're only getting taxed if you're making 39K a year, you'd probably like that. And if you scale that up 100x, you know, and go, you're making $700,000 a year, but you're getting taxed if you're making 390K, you'd think that's pretty awesome too. So, you know, as you scale up, the benefit becomes more noticeable and becomes a better benefit. Okay, so then there's always, probably not in this crowd, but there'd be some crowds in which people would say, well, that's not fair. Why do these real estate investors get all these different tax breaks? I don't understand. So you have to remember that when an investor purchases a property, they're helping a title company closer and the rest of the staff to stay employed. They're helping a lender, an appraiser, and an underwriter to stay employed. Most transactions happen with 1 or 2 agents. So you're helping a real estate agent or 2 in their offices to stay employed. Most people, when they buy a property, they look to improve it. Some people will improve it themselves, but some, you know, when you're myself, I'm hiring a contractor to do it. So you're helping that contractor to stay employed because now they have jobs to do at your apartment and maybe other people that are doing the same thing. Now those people have to buy supplies. They're probably going to go to Home Depot or Menards or you know, some other different place like that. They're helping to keep those businesses going. And then of course, you're also potentially improving the property value in that area, especially if you took like the worst property on the block and turned it into, you know, on par with the rest, or maybe one of the better ones on the block. You've essentially helped improve the property values of that neighborhood. And then of course, you're providing housing for people that need a place to live, because not everybody wants to own their house. There's a number of people out there that choose to rent. So you're providing all these good things. So basically the government is rewarding investors for the behavior they want to see. You're pumping money into the economy, and you're allowing a lot of other people to pump money into the economy as well. So they like to see it. That's part of the reason they cut off that benefit on that depreciation after 27.5 years. They're like, hey, it's been 27.5 years. Do something else with this. You know, we're not going to keep that benefit going. So anyways, okay. All right, so options with buy and hold. So as I still think home ownership is real estate investing 101. You now have rent control. Your mortgage is fixed for however many years you set it. Most people set it for 30 years. That can't go up on you. They can't come back to you 5 years later and say, oh man, interest rates are a lot higher now, or property values are a lot higher now. They can't do that. So even though you have some things like your property taxes, and if you're part of an HOA fee, those can go up and affect your monthly expenses, your mortgage cannot. So homeownership, that's the start. or for some people, it doesn't have to be. I'll kind of talk about that later. So the next step would be a live-in flip. So that's where you buy a house that could use a little bit of work or maybe a lot of work if you have a high tolerance. And you move in and you just gradually improve things over the next 2 to 3 years. And, so of course your property went up in value during the 2 to 3 years you owned it. But since you made some strategic improvements, you've maybe improved it to the point where now it's worth substantially more. And now you sell it and purchase another home and perhaps do it again, unless you're like, okay, we did that once or twice and now we're not going to do that anymore. But it's just a good way to earn a little bit of money through real estate. You do not have to pay cap gains if you've lived in the property for 2 or more years. If you've only owned it for a year or year and a half, you would have to pay capital gains when you sell. So if you live in flip, you want to live in it at least 2 years. And then of course there's the convert your house to a rental. So you move into the, you move there, you live there, you save up enough money that you can purchase the next house without having to sell that first house. And then when you purchase the next house, you just keep that house. It's on a fixed mortgage, and you just rent it out. That's definitely one of the options that you can do. All right, so then we've got house hacking. So these are the ones that can really accelerate, and if this is like, you have to catch them young, because if once you are old enough, you're probably not going to want to do one of these methods. But if you catch someone young enough, these are some really awesome ways that you can grow your wealth. So house hacking, you own the house. We already kind of talked about it before. You own the house, you rent out some of the rooms to friends or family members. And by doing that, you're getting the benefit of the whole place, but the other people that are there are substantially reducing your expenses to be there. House hacking 2.0 is now you get a 2 to 4 unit building. You can still get a 30-year fixed rate on a 2 to 4 unit building. You live in one of the units, you rent out the other units. And, from what I've seen, at least the people that I've helped do this, when on a 2 unit, you can get it to the point that the rent on the other side is paying for most of the mortgage payment. And then you just have the remaining balance of the mortgage payment and the property taxes and other expenses. So you're substantially reducing your monthly expenses. And in a 3 to 4 unit, it's actually possible to be making money living in the apartment building. So if you can find those right situations, it's pretty awesome. And then 3.0 is doing just like we did in 2.0, but then additionally, let's say you still have a room in your apartment, you rent that out too. Well, now you're just making even more money to live where you're at. And house hacking 4.0, you do any of them from above, you move out, repeat in a new location, you just keep doing it. And from what I've been told, that's what, for those of you that have heard of Steve Brown Apartments, has a lot of apartments in town. That's how he started, from what I've been told. He would just get into a place, live in it, get the whole building rented out, move out, repeat. And before you know it, his name is on a large percentage of apartment buildings around Madison. Okay, so then financing. I'm not going to talk about too much about this, because you should really talk to your lender to see what's the best fit. But a lot of people ask me, how should I finance if I'm going to purchase rental property? How should I finance it? So there's 2 ways. There's basically the conventional, which I'll talk about here, and then there's the commercial / portfolio loans. And so with the conventional, biggest pro, you get that 30-year fixed. It's never going to change, which is pretty awesome. Rate risk. So if you're only going to buy 1 or 2 properties, this might be the way to go. If you're just going to kind of buy 1 or 2 and just sit on them and not do anything else, that's probably a good way to go. The cons, it's got to be in your personal name, at least initially. I've talked to some attorneys that have ways of later put in an LLC if you really want, but you don't necessarily have to. There is a limit to the number of conventional loans you can have, so eventually you won't be able to keep doing that if you want to scale. And typically you need a higher down payment. So for a single family house, you're looking at 15 to 20% down, and the bigger the building gets, the larger the percent down needs to be. And once you got above 5 units, you can't use this option. There's also more documentation, due diligence in the underwriting process. All right, so then if you go to a commercial or portfolio, and the reason they call it portfolio is you're literally keeping, the bank is keeping in their portfolio. They're not selling it off to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or any of those types of things. So they're keeping it in their portfolio. And because of that, it's there's some additional pros and cons to that. So one of the pros, easily transferred into an LLC. You can purchase it as an LLC. You don't even have to purchase it into your personal name if that's important to you. Most lenders have a limit, or most lenders do not have a limit in this category. So you can just scale up as big as you want to be. Typically, you can get a lower down payment. So on that same 4 unit, where now my conventional lender saying I need 25% down, my portfolio lender saying 20% down is fine. And if you've done several loans with a portfolio lender, they start to get a little bit more flexible with you and might even let you to do 15% down, like I was eventually able to do. Okay. And then, you know, just in general, the options tend to be more flexible. So the cons, the interest rate can be higher. From my experience, once again, because it's flexible, it's always changing. So you can, when I first started, the interest rate I got was slightly better, not way better, than getting a conventional loan. But now that I've done as many loans that I'm doing, if I finance conventionally, it would be a higher interest rate than what I'm getting as a higher interest rate than my portfolio. So this is what I do pretty much exclusively now. But when you're first starting, a lot of people go the other direction. So then you can only lock the rate for 3, 5, or 7 year terms. Typically 5 years is the most common. So you can amortize it over an extended time, but you're only locking that rate for a certain amount of years. The amortization is usually 25 years instead of 30. So that makes the payment a little bit higher. So that's going to cut into your cash flow a little bit. But from my experience, the amortization is, again, flexible, and you can negotiate that with your lender. And then the biggest thing to keep in mind that I didn't know until I was getting ready to do some of these early year refinances, there's an early termination fee if you refinance with someone else. So you got to know what those are. You got to know, and usually it's more initially. So maybe it's 3% if you do it in the first 12 months. And then it's 2% if you do it in year 2 or year 3. And then maybe it's just down to 1% if you do it in year 4 or year 5. So it's just good to know that before so just, again, whether you go conventional or commercial, just have a conversation with your lender to see what's a better fit for you.
Yeah, quick question on that. Do they generally have those penalties applicable if you refinance with them, for example, if you want to do a cash out refi?
Yeah, so if you want, oh, okay, yep. Oh, okay. So the question is, if you refinance with the same lender, or do you get that penalty? And the answer is no. Usually, well, even check, but usually they have it in there that, the way I was able to make it work for me is just that, I actually was able to just pay off. It was a small loan. I was able to pay it off, and that was also no penalty to pay it off early. But some will have that too. But if you go back to the same lender, I mean, obviously just look at their terms, just know that in advance before closing day. Because that's usually when I found out, is at closing day, they would just say, oh, by the way, there's this prepayment penalty if you like, and it's just like, oh, so just, have those conversations early on. But in pretty much every portfolio lender I've talked to, if you refinance with the same lender, then there is not a penalty. But everybody's different, so check with your lender. All right. So a lot of people say, well, how do you get the money to invest? So you could do what I did. I grew up in a family where My parents got a divorce when I was quite young. They went to college non-traditionally. So when I was growing up and in elementary school, I remember also, sometimes like being in night classes with my parents. So if you think, two single parents raising two kids, independently from each other and going to college, I mean, it's just not a lot of money. So we grew up with savings as being part of our habit. So, that's why when I bought that first rental property, it was just like, it's 2011. The housing market was going down. The home that I lived in at the time was going down in value as well. And lo and behold, because saving is part of my nature, I just had enough money to purchase another house. And I was like, let's just double down and I'll get another property. So live below your means, save up money, focus on the long game, have financial discipline. So second, do a cash out refinance of your home. If you've owned your home a long time, it's probably worth substantially more than what you bought it for. You could do a cash out refinance. Once again, because the loan amount's going up, it is possible, it's likely that your monthly payment will go up. But if you can offset that, so if let's say you cash out refinance your house, your monthly payment goes up by $150 a month. But because you did that, you buy a rental property that makes you $500 a month. Well, that would make sense and be worth it. Okay, so just kind of got to see if there's a situation like that. Of course, you could always partner with another investor. It doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50, but you can partner up with somebody else. For the real estate agents in the room, I mean, you're involved in real estate, so perhaps you bring a skill set and some money, and the other investor brings more of the money. So it can be something that you work out besides that. And then, of course, you can do a combination of any of the three above. So a lot of people ask me, what should I be looking for? What kind of return on investment should I be looking for? What determines whether I buy a property or don't buy a property? I keep it really, really simple. When I work with my first time investors, basically just two rules. Rule number one, the property must cash flow even if you hire property management. So, some people are like looking at the property and they're like, oh, this cash flows. And it's like, but if you hired management, would it still cash flow? If it doesn't, then it doesn't make sense to purchase because you might not like doing property management. You might not be good at property management. Not everybody's meant to do it. While I was doing it, I thought I was pretty good at it until I hired a professional property manager. And now I realize how average I was at it. And I had some benefits that some people don't have. I was in public education for 16 years. That gave me an opportunity to work with a lot of different personalities and sometimes working with people that aren't so happy with me. So, I think I did overall a decent job at it. But, in hindsight, I know that just, some people just aren't built for that. So it should still positive cash flow with property management, even if you intend to manage it yourself. And then there can't be anything so wrong with the property that you're going to quit, give up, or be forced to sell in the first 2 years. Because if you decide to quit, give up, and be forced to sell 5 or 10 years down the road, the property's probably worth so much more that you can still get a pretty good return from your investment. But if it happens in the first 1 to 2 years, now you are possibly making it a good investment for the next person because now you've become a distressed seller and you don't want to be in that position. So that's really my only two rules. Like when I first started, when I look at the things I did to analyze properties when I first started versus the things I did now, it just goes to show you don't need to be the smartest guy in the room. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out how to make money off of real estate. Okay. Oh, here's the other one. But all the good deals are gone. If I could get started when you did back in 2011, I would do that. Well, so a couple of things about that. One, nobody wanted to get started in 2011. I had people telling me, you're making a huge mistake by buying this property. property's losing value every year. Why would you buy a property? It doesn't make any sense. So, every once in a while I hear from the person that just says, I'm just going to wait till it goes down again. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you a lot of credit if you got the guts to buy a place when it's going down, because at that time, nobody was looking to do that. But so anyways, so I focused on deals that happened just last year. The deals that happened this year, you don't know how good of a deal it really is until at least a year or two later. So last year, when I purchased property number 6, that's summer of 2020, it was final purchase price was $204K. So it was a 2-unit over by East High School, probably 3-4 blocks away from East High School. Good neighborhood. It was 180 days on market. It was 20 to 30K below market value. It was listed at 229, which I thought was really low for that area for a 2-unit. I tried to convince 3 different clients to go see it. They wouldn't even go see it just because the photos looked bad. But I was just like, there's got to be something there. So I went and saw it. The units looked good. There was a ton of problems with the property, and a first-time investor probably might have struggled with some of the things that were involved with that one. But because it had some problems, because it had been on the market so long, I negotiated another $25K off the purchase price, and I put $30K into it in the first 2 months, and then eventually it appraised for $315. So when I did a cash out refinance, I was able to pull $252K out, which is $18K more than what I was all in for. So, bought it for $204, $30K in, now I'm at $234. I got to take $252 out. I still own the property. It still cash flows, not a lot. I mean, we're talking maybe $4,000 a year, but it still makes me money every year. I still get the property appreciation. It's still going up in value. And I got paid $18K to buy it. I essentially have like zero money into it. So then someone might say, okay, well, I don't have enough money to do a down payment and then put $30K into it in the first 2 months that I own it. Okay, so I helped a former student athlete of mine get a duplex in Mount Horeb last year, right before the pandemic, at $315. It was 90 days on market. It was on the MLS, it was on all the apps, Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com. Anybody could have bought this thing. We decided, because they were doing FHA financing, which some sellers see as not as good as going with conventional financing. We decided, hey, well, let's give them full ask for your closing costs to be paid. So, so with FHA financing, they're only putting 3.5% down. To use FHA financing, you have to move into the property. Okay, so you can't do that if you're not planning to live in the property. So we negotiated their closing costs to be paid. So their only cost was that $11K down payment. And then they moved into, so it was a 2-bed, 2-bath. It was larger than their apartment at the time. And because the other side was rented out, their monthly expenses went down $200 a month to live there. Okay, now fast forward a year and a half, and because the market's been so aggressive, they've improved their equity position to a 50% equity position because the property is improved in value that much. So they could literally keep living there and do a cash out refinance and pay for the next duplex with the cash out refinance from the place that they're currently living in. Or they could, if they could find another duplex that they like to live in, they could do the 3.5 again, move in, buy it for next to nothing, in terms of the leverage, because that's what makes it so powerful, is you could, overpay for the property with the fact that you're only getting it for 3.5% down. As long as it's going to cash flow when you move out, you're in a good position. So, anyways, now I got a couple questions. Yes. Okay, so that's a good question with that. What? Yeah, so that's a good question. So basically asking with the FHA, how does that work when you go to the next one? I mean, what I do know is there's a limit. So like, you can't just, keep, there's only so many times you can do that. But that's, again, talk to your lender and just see what your options are. But, and I don't know exactly what they're planning to do with that, but yeah, there's only so many times that you can do the FHA.
Kind of like on top of what you said, so is there a minimum amount of years you need to live in owner occupied?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So is there a minimum amount of years you need to own or occupy? Most lenders require that you live in the property 1 year. Although I don't think anybody knocks on your door at the exact 1 year mark to make sure that you're still there. But, you'd probably, to be safe, you'd want to live there close to a year or just over a year. Yeah. Did you have a question too?
Yeah, what do you mean by 50% equity position?
So, yeah, so they bought it at 315. They've paid down the, okay, so basically, how did they get to a 50% equity position is the question. So they bought it at 315 and they had 10K down. During the year and a half that they've owned it, they've been paying down the principal, so they gained some share that way. And then additionally, the property has increased in value, over 100K. I mean, one of the things that we found out when we walked out of that room that I was like, this just, we're getting a little bit off subject. This is just like why people should make sure, they're reaching out to an agent that's really knowledgeable. When we were at the closing table that day, remember, they couldn't sell this thing. It's on the market for 3 months. We're at the closing table that day, and the seller's like, oh, by the way, if you just want to, sell off the other half, Mount Horeb has really easy 0 lot line restrictions. So you could probably just go to the city and, for a couple $100, just pay to have a 0 lot line and keep living in your side and sell the other side. And we walked out of there. I said, you guys just, you don't even know what you stepped into. Like if you separate, if it's that easy to separate it and sell off each side, you could sell off each side right now. Because I helped somebody buy half of a shared wall house in another part of Mount Horeb. I said, you could sell off each side for 200K right now, and they just bought it for 315. And that was at the time. So that was a deal even I passed on. I mean, so just to kind of give you an idea of, that there are deals that are still out there. Those are just 2 pretty good ones from just the last year. Okay, so lessons learned. Early on, I should have hired an agent. So that first rental property purchase I made, I did not hire a real estate agent. The market was so slow at the time. I just literally just called up listing agents. And like, I mean, I think I still would have gotten the same house that I got a lot faster because I would have had some guidance and somebody that's been through the process. And, I don't know. So I should have hired an agent who would have really accelerated my process early on. Also, I should have just started off with house hacking. My first home was a condo in Verona. And I mean, I wish I would have bought a duplex, rented it out, repeat the process. If I would have done that in my mid-20s instead of buying the condo, I would probably be in the same financial position now back 10 years ago. So down the road, eventually you have to know your dollar per hour. I should have hired a property manager as soon as I bought that 4th rental property. I was way too busy to manage 4 properties. I hung in there and kind of grinded it out. But then when I hired property management, it was such an awesome decision because it just freed up. I mean, it freed up my mind to be like, oh, I can actually, take on another property. There was one point where I remember I was just like, hey, if I could just make 6 figures off these rental properties, that would be awesome. And to do that, I would have to pay off all of my debt. So if I just have these 4 properties, if I really work hard over the next 4 years, or 4 or 5 years, I can pay off all these properties and make it 100,000. And then I was doing a little bit more reading and I was like, or I could just buy like 20 more units in the next year, and I'm still, and I'm there. And that's basically what happened. I just started using the equity from the places I already had. And then at all times, just make the offer. Okay, you just have to make the offer. You know, the other thing about real estate investing is, you know, the offer price is seen as a suggestion. It's not like when you're buying a house and it's like the asking price, if you go under that, especially if you go under that in the first week, it's seen as kind of like, you know, a little bit insulting. Usually you want to go at least at their asking price or above if it's early on in the sale process. There's been times where I would go in with an investor, we'd put in, you know, above ask with really great terms, only to find out, oh, like, doesn't sound like any of the offers were even at the asking price. Everybody just came in. So, you know, just make the offer. It's not always like that now. Sometimes it can be competitive depending on the property, but, you know, don't be intimidated that there's another offer. Don't assume that the other offer is above ask. Just make the offer. And then be educated. So, you know, like this, doing what you're doing right now, know your options. If you know your options, you'll have better results. And then don't hesitate. You know, there's been times where, you know, I had a pretty good deal. I mean, there's been times where I had a pretty good deal and I was just like, well, let me just crunch the numbers a little bit more. And then in that time, someone else made an offer lower than what I would have, and then they got the deal. So, so just, you know, educate yourself and don't let that happen. So insider tips. So as I've already kind of mentioned before, there's no smoke and gun, and this isn't rocket science. The reality is, I mean, if you looked at my spreadsheet from when I purchased my first rental property, I feel like I had the best, I really do feel like I got the best deal in Madison for that particular point of the year. But if you look at all the rest of the ones that I didn't make an offer on, and you saw what that you could have bought it for then and what it would be worth now, there was a lot of other good deals there. And you could say the same about, you know, last year or even this year. There's things that this year that have been on the market, on the MLS, not even off market, that you fast forward a couple of years, you're gonna be like, oh, that was a pretty good deal. And that was a pretty good deal. And that was a pretty good deal. The other, I love this saying, don't wait to buy real estate, buy real estate and wait. You know, you know, like I said, my parents weren't real estate investors. I literally just picked this up as I went. And, you know, look at where I'm at now. Literally anybody could do this if they just, if they just set their mind to it and take action. Have an open mind. You know, it is a little bit different. It's a little bit different than the status quo. So do have an open mind as you're doing this. And there is no perfect deal. A lot of people are just, you know, oh, I'm just waiting for that, you know, and like I said before, even that first purchase for that year, and the perfect deal changes. The things that I can do now in comparison to when I first started, I mean, just night and day. There's just when you've been doing it for a while, the financial options that you have, the equity out options that I have, I can just do a lot different, you know, I can just do a lot more than what I was able to do back when I started. And then just, of course, be prepared, you know, and that goes back to being educated, know your options, and you can be really prepared for when the right situation comes your way. Also, expert in one is better than jack of all trades. So like I've seen some people who bounce around like, okay, I'm going to do a flip. Oh, now I'm going to buy this place and Airbnb it. Oh, now I'm going to buy this place and, you know, buy and hold. Oh, now I'm going to, you know, now I'm going to try a totally different area. So if you're trying to do all these different things, you'll never really get great at any one thing. So for me, it's multifamily in the Madison area. And first it was small multifamily. Now I've kind of graduated to like medium sized multifamily, you know, 8-unit range. But I can still dip down. I mean, I still see opportunities in different parts where I'm like, oh, that's a 2-unit in downtown Madison. And nobody's put an offer on that in, you know, 2 months because, you know, it looks like it's got some issues here and it's got some issues there. Well, heck, maybe I'll just go in and negotiate a good price, do XYZ, make it worth a lot more, because I've done it before. And then of course the final is just take action, do something. Doesn't have to be put an offer in today, but do something that moves you in the right direction. So action steps. So 4 action steps. These are all things you can do. And the thing they have in common is none of them cost you any money. Okay. First one is interview and hire a real estate agent or team that has experience with investment real estate. When I about 6 years ago, I trained for an Ironman triathlon. When I did that, I didn't just show up and do it. And I didn't train on my own and do it. I hired a coach who had done an Ironman triathlon and someone that had not only just completed it, but done really well. And then additionally taught other people who were closer to my ability range on how to successfully do it. And I hired that person to do it. So same thing, hire someone that, a real estate agent, maybe not your aunt or your cousin, but someone that's actually had experience in it. Second, talk to a lender, discuss those options. Like I said, you got to figure out, what financing options are going to work for you. Next, go back to that agent that you've decided to work with, have them set you up on an MLS search for something that fits your price range and the area that you're looking for. And then start analyzing properties and having discussions with your agent. Okay, so like I said, you can do all 4 of those things. You can do, and that moves you in the right direction and doesn't cost you any money. Recommended books and resources. So I always recommend Rich Dad Poor Dad by Richard Kiyosaki. If you haven't read that book, I'd highly recommend it. Basically, as I was reading it, I was already, relatively far on this real estate investing journey. And he does bring up real estate investing, and he brings up other things in that book too. But it's definitely, he doesn't give you any real strategies, but he definitely provides the motivation and of why somebody should look to do that. Now, Millionaire Real Estate Investor is like the inverse of that. It really has all of the tools that you actually need to be a successful real estate investor, but it's pretty dry. It's not an easy read, but there's awesome information in it. And every time I read that book, I get I pick up a new nugget every time. So I really recommend that. Bigger Pockets podcast, which is on, I usually just watch the YouTube, but it is on a podcast if you prefer that format. And they have multiple different platforms within their organization. I listened to the real estate investing one. I listened to the real estate rookie, which is someone that's done, if I remember right, it's like someone who's done like 6 deals or less, or owns, like 10 or fewer units or something like that. That's really, but I still listen to it now. And that's a really good one. And then the one thing that's it's a business book, but it's really good in terms of just, ask that focusing question. What's the one thing I could do today that by doing so, it would make my life easier, or make everything else easier or unnecessary. So it just kind of helps you really focus in on what's important, and it often applies to investment real estate. So I think that's it for slides. So I'll take some questions, and you got your surveys. So now that I'm complete, please fill those out. And we'll do a drawing here in a little bit for these 3 books. And then if you're planning on coming to the social, there's, because there'll be 4 names drawn. So one person will get each of these 3 books, and then one person will get their first drink at RP Adler's on me, depending. So as you're filling those out, what questions do you have for me? Yeah.
So sort of a 2-part question. The first is, how often do you have renters that don't pay? And sort of like, what do you do? And then when in your assumptions about when you're calculating the cash flow property, what do you assume upfront for how many months in the year you're doing?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question first. So basically, the first question is, you know, how often do you have tenants that don't pay rent? Prior to the pandemic, it was super rare. It almost never happened. And then even when it did happen, usually it's like, you know, hey, what's going on? What's the problem? And then you just work on a strategy. So like I had one group, back when I had the single family house, and pretty much I had college kids every year, where they had one guy that just stopped paying. And so, well, first his check bounced, then he just stopped paying. And I basically just reached out to the group and said, hey, you know, what's going on? And they didn't even know. They didn't even, you know, so essentially I just met with them and just said, hey, like, I'm sorry that something with your life situation is going on, but these guys don't want to be negatively impacted. Like, can you find somewhere else to live so they can get a sublet? And that's basically, you know, what happened. And then in the future, I just started, you know, just saying, hey, I need one rent check coming in for the whole group collectively. So I basically switched that strategy. Then I had another, when I bought that third rental property on East Main, I had a group that was struggling to pay rent. Once again, what's going on? Oh, you know, life circumstance changed, you know, job situation, you know, whatever. And then basically I was like, well, okay, are you going to be able to keep making ends meet here? And they're like, no. I'm like, how about I just, you know, let you out of your, like, and they weren't awesome tenants anyways. So I basically just said, you know, why don't, if you pay me X amount, I'll just say we're good. I won't come after you for any more money, and we're going to end your lease at the end of this month. And that worked out for everybody. During the pandemic, out of the 17 units that I had during that time, I only had 3 groups not paying. And of course, me and my property manager at the very start came up with a strategy on, you know, how we could get on the right track. And I think it was ultimately, I think it was our approach that encouraged people to pay their rent. Because basically I was just, you know, telling them like, hey, look, you know, we want to work with you. We realize that, you know, you're not getting paid right now, but at the end of the day, we got to make a mortgage payment, or we're not going to be the ones that you're dealing with anymore. And I think because we approached it that way, people were more willing to, you know, do what they could. And then as soon as some of those assistant programs came out, my property manager was all over that, sometimes like literally driving out to their place and saying, hey, sign here, free money. And then just mail it in. And eventually everybody, at least for my properties, everybody got caught up. So, so it worked out pretty good. And what was the second part?
Your assumptions, how many months of the year do you assume you
I mean, so I assume I'll get paid every month. I do when I'm doing my breakdown. I do calculate a 3% vacancy rate, because in Madison the vacancy rate's around 2.5%. So I just round that up a little bit. Really, the only time I have a vacancy is when I plan to have a vacancy. So it's like, for example, on that 8 unit where I did the 70K of renovations, it was like, okay, we're going to just clear this out. Like, you know, once this tenant's gone, we're going to have a month in which we're going to do all these things. And the first one that we did ended up being longer than 1 month, because we couldn't even take photos or anything. We didn't want to show it, you know, until it was done. But once we had those photos from the first unit, we could show those for other people. And so that would help generate interest, so that by the time it was complete, we already had like 3 or 4 people that wanted to see it and were interested in it. But you know, but that's where that 3% comes in again. Cause like, you know, like, okay, we have essentially every unit by the end of it will have had a 1 month vacancy, but now that might be the last vacancy for years. From now on, it'll be, you know, 1 person out, 1 person in the next day, or maybe there's that group ends up staying around for, you know, 5+ years, 10+ years, you know, who knows? So, yeah.
You were high school,
teacher and then you make the jump to kind of I guess we did just a simple math equation like time.
Yeah, so the question's like, how did you know it was time to make the jump from being a teacher to a real estate agent, or combo with real estate investor? And the answer, I mean, it's just like anything with real estate is, it wasn't like there was no exact formula to it. It's just like, anything, and when I teach high school kids, I actually have like another one like on, being a real estate agent as well. And so when you buy a rental property, you're putting that down payment, you start getting some money, and you don't know how it's going to shake out until it actually shakes out. Same thing as a real estate agent. When I got my real estate license, I was already like, okay, does it make sense to get my real estate license? Like by the time I'm all done, and by the, getting my license, paying the union dues, all that other stuff, I'm basically in it for, $1,600, $1,700, $1,800, something along those lines. If I make one commission this year, I make all that back and then some, So, so when I first started real estate, that was the risk. Then it was, okay, now I've got a decent stream of deals coming. Is it enough that I can make it my full-time career? Fortunately, I had a really good first 12 months. So I actually made as much in my first 12 months as a real estate agent as I did teaching. I made like, equal salaries in each. I didn't know if that was luck, fluke, just like maybe just a really good year. But for me, I just said, well, I'm already making 40K a year on the rental properties. If I can just make 20 to 30 as a real estate agent, that'd be enough. And then what ended up happening is I ended up, actually doubling the amount of business I did because now I was doing it full time. Yeah, but like, because that got so much busier, I wasn't able to grow the investments. But yeah, there was no concrete formula. Basically what it came down to was I wasn't enjoying my job anymore, and it was affecting my life outside, and that became more important than the money. So I was even willing to make less money as long as I got that peace of mind back. So yeah, Allie.
What do you expect to pay your
So
no exact formula.
yeah, so I mean, I've heard different numbers thrown out. I would say when I put it onto a spreadsheet, I usually calculate for 8%. I know some property managers are 10%, so you could calculate for that. There's definitely property managers that will do it for less. I've even heard as low as like 4%, but I don't know if I'd put that on a spreadsheet that low if I'm working for working on behalf of a client. But I would say a safe number, the number that I most frequently put into the spreadsheets is 8%. I think that's a good number to base off of when you're calculating expenses. So 8%, that's of the gross rent. So so yeah. All right, and then there's another question over
It's on
here.
the same question.
Oh, same question. Okay.
You want to pause for the drawing?
Oh yeah. Okay. All right. Oh, do we got some more? That's your chance. Oh, and we got Mike over here. So we'll go in the order here too. So all right, so we'll kind of go. So whoever pick first gets first pick of book and or beverage. All right, first one, Rob Warren. Is he here? Oh, gotta be here to win. Oh, he'll be bummed.
He'll be in it
He'll
to
be
win.
bummed. Dan Wilson, come on up. You get first pick. I'll go ahead and pick the next one while he's coming up. Oh, so I'll just go over these again. You have the book, Flip, Millionaire Real Estate Investor, Hold, and then First Drink at RP Adler's.
I gotta go with Flip.
All right, sweet, sweet. Thank you. All right. Lauren. They're gonna be so bummed. Rob and Lauren are married. they were really meant to get that. Matt Moab. All right, come on up. Which one are you gonna take? Oh yeah, that's one. I've probably read that book like 3 times. That's a really good one. Andy White.
Oh.
Let's see what-
Able to go to RP, so
Oh.
I'll have to do the book.
All right, so the next person, hopefully you're coming. Otherwise, I'll owe you at a later time. Caroline. Oh no.
Yeah, do you wanna?
I'll draw one more. Otherwise, I'll just figure out when we get there. Isabella.
All right. I'm excited to be coming.
All right. Any other questions? This is just for show, unless you really want it.
Yeah, of the properties you bought, how many of them have you bought them, were they listed on the MLS?
That's a good question. I'll go back to, so the question was how many of the properties that I buy were on the MLS? So I'm gonna go back to that slide. Delaplane was on the MLS for a long time. 1307 and 1214 East Mifflin. I actually bought directly from my real estate agent. So they weren't on the MLS, but they had been in prior years. In fact, when I purchased 911 Delaplane, I was holding out for 1214 East Mifflin. Because I remember when I found it, I was like, oh, this is a way better deal. But I don't have enough money. I just need like 2 more months and I've got enough saved up. And then the agent for 911 Delaplane called me up and said, hey, we've got an offer on this property. Do you want to get in on it? And I was like, no, I got another one. And he's like, just make an offer, anything. And I was like, oh, they don't have anything. He's made it up, tried to get me to offer. So then I just went way low and ended up getting it. So East Main Street was on the MLS. Wilson was on the MLS. Upham was on the MLS. Gammon was not on the MLS, but the person selling it, it was a real estate agent selling it. The seller chose that they didn't want it. This is back when you could have pocket listings. It might as well have been on the MLS. When I showed up, I was part of a group of 10. It was a lot of high producing agents in the Madison area with their investor clients. And then as soon as we left, there was another group of agents that are high producing in the area that were coming in with their clients. So a lot of people got to see that one. The only one that I bought that was off market that like completely, not represented by an agent of any kind was the last one on Valley Street. So, but Gammon was technically off market, but there's so many people that saw it, it might as well have been on market. So, all right. Any other questions? All right. Hey, thank you so much for coming in, everybody. Really appreciate it. Oh yeah, RP Adler's, it's less than 5 minutes away. If you can catch a beverage there, would love to chat more. So thanks so much.